Okay.
Here we go. 3, 2, 1.
3, 2, 1, go.
I did that so that
Just
no
a
one would
bit.
talk over me, but we still managed to do that. Excellent.
Well done. Excellent.
Get it out of your system.
I'm getting punchy.
My turn next.
I need...
Welcome back to the Papers Podcast, where the number needed to listen is 1. We are in various states of hilarity and illness, which is making for an interesting recording session. Jason, are you still with us?
I'm still here. I got my my froggy voice because I'm got some dumb virus. Damn it.
It sounds more like late night radio DJ voice, which I kind of say, through a filter, there's a certain attractiveness as long as you're on the screen and not in my house, because whatever that is, I did not want that.
My voice goes with your mustache. That's what we got going here.
Yeah, it's both of them are. Thankfully, this is an audio program and not a visual or in-person program. Linda, how are you? You have high energy today.
I have some high energy, and I'm thinking if we gave Jason some scotch to gargle with, it would help his voice, but it certainly would not help your mustache.
Well,
wow, that's a good line.
If we all drank some scotch, everybody would appreciate the mustache more. Lara, you have a concerned look on your face as to how did I get on this program and how do I get off? What's the episode you have for us today?
Okay, so I have a paper that I selected for 2 specific reasons, and I'm going to get to them as we go through. But I wanted to start off with, talking a little bit about this work that the paper is talking about. I've personally been doing a fair bit of work in the past few years, looking at understanding medical errors, and not so much the actual process of how an error happened, and not about how to prevent them. But what I'm interested in is what does it mean for the physician when they do the incredibly human thing of not being perfect, of making mistake? And how does the system react to that? How do other people react to that? What's it like? And I worry, and I mean that sincerely, I do worry that as a field, we spend a lot of time talking about avoiding errors. And I agree that's really important. We don't want mistakes to happen, period. Agreed. But errors happen. And despite our best prevention, we're human and we're going to make mistakes. Errors happen because we're imperfect human beings working in imperfect systems. And so when I saw this paper, I thought this might give us a couple of things to talk about in different places. And the manuscript I picked is entitled Reflection on Medical Errors, a Thematic Analysis, and it was published in Medical Teacher in 2023. Now, I've renamed this paper, as is our wont to do in these shows, My Best Mistake. And I'm going to come back to that title in a minute. But first, let's just get into the paper. The paper suggests that their basic premise is that we can use reflection not only to learn from errors, but also to prevent them. They define reflection, thank you for defining your terms, as the systematic and critical analysis of past behaviors and underlying assumptions. Fine, they propose that reflection can be used as a tool for minimizing errors. In the study, the authors want to understand the reflection that physicians engage in and think that we can use that to help us design interventions and educational efforts to minimize future errors. This is where I want to turn to the 3 of you who are physicians and human. So what's your take on their proposal that reflection can be harnessed to prevent future errors? On the face of it, the proposal is just logical, right? If you think on why you made a mistake, then you're likely not to make that mistake again. But my question to you, I guess, really is about the stories you tell about those mistakes that happen. Are the stories that you tell in private the same stories that you tell in public? Do you revise stories depending on your audience? Do you make different interpretations privately than you might in public? So let's go, Jason, Linda, John.
Love this topic. I love the clever approach of the authors. Your question to us is, do we buy the premise that reflection is beneficial? I love their definition of reflection. That's useful to me. I can see how it's, it can be used. I do think reflection is a powerful tool to help us all be better doctors. I'm not sure I buy their rationale, because further on they talk about Pat Croskery's work, that if you get people to reflect on their cognitive biases, it makes them better diagnosticians. And John's work has shown that that's actually not true. So their rationale as to why I don't buy, but I love the idea, and I actually buy the idea. I just don't agree with why.
So This is a really important area. I agree, Jason. I have some doubts about reflection. I mean, it's not to prelude things too much. It's one of the questions is the timing of reflection and whether you can actually make things better by moving up when the reflection happens. I'm not sure that you can, and they don't actually give any reasons. Sorry, they don't. I'm not sure you can, and they don't actually give any descriptions of how you can do that. So taking away the reflection part of it, yes, it's important. Yes, storytelling is important. And it might be that if I see someone about to make an error, I can tell a story that might help prevent that error. But if I don't see someone about to make an error or in the process of making an error, then how are we going to get people to reflect on it?
This topic is really important to me. It kind of intersects with a lot of my own program of research. And I want to shout out to Sujani Kandasamy, who was the first author on the study we did. The title is I Made a Mistake, and it's published in JECP. It's published a few years ago, and it's interesting that the authors of this present paper we're talking about don't actually reference it because it's almost directly related to their findings. In there, we took de-identified participants, you're welcome, Meredith Young, and asked them to talk about a mistake that they'd never told anyone about and a mistake that they told others about. And using a narrative analysis approach, we're able to determine what were the elements of the mistake, what were the learnings, what was the rationale for keeping it private versus others. And so there's a complexity that's woven there. And I'd really direct the Papers podcast audience to kind of go pull that paper if this is a topic of interest to them. And yes, reflection is important. Reflecting by yourself is probably a futile exercise because you can't see what you can't see. But I'm going to leave maybe some of my sharper criticism later in the discussion section, which is I don't believe you can reflect in action on these types of diagnostic errors. Yeah. And as Jason articulated, a lot of it seems common sense and the strong editorialization around diagnostic errors put forward by Crosscarry and others is not supported by any of the empiric data.
Can I just jump in there to say that this is not unusual, John? A lot of people aren't citing your papers, so don't worry. I get this is off.
But John, but listeners, we will have, John will share a link for that manuscript so that we can put it in the abstract online. So if you can see that manuscript, thanks for that, John. I don't know about that paper, so I'm going to go read it after we're done. So the authors of this manuscript ask a 3-part question. What trigger doctors to become aware of their errors? 2, what topics do doctors reflect upon to explain their errors? And 3, what lessons do doctors learn after reflection on their errors, and how is it visible in behavior change? Fine. So let's move on to methods. And I have a bunch of comments, but I'm going to try to get through all this, and then we'll all comment, and then I'll have a few comments to make too. The authors conduct a thematic analysis of pre-existing data. And it was pre-existing data of a very particular kind. It was a book that was published, and that book is entitled When Healthcare Hurts, Doctors Share Their Darkest Hours. The book consists of, and I quote, transcribed verbatims from interviews between the book's author and medical doctors, end quote. Publicly well-known, respected doctors working in patient care had an interview with the book's author, and that interview was then presented in the book in 3 pages, following a specific outline. So what was that outline? Well, there are a couple of parts. First, it starts with the doctor's name, their photo, a specialty, and a quote about the error. Then an introduction is given with the doctor's description of some core aspects of the error. The second part gives a summary of the doctor's academic and work history. And the last part is, I quote, an extensive reflection is given about the analysis of what happened and the changes the doctor made after making the error, end of quote. So in terms of analysis, 2 authors read the reports in the book and coded them independently. They did line-by-line coding using, and I quote again, a constant comparative approach. They developed codes and themes. Quote, that's what they said there. They explain that to code, they identified triggers, topics, and lesson learned. So they use their research questions to structure their coding. That's fine. They turned codes into themes by, and I quote, selecting verbs that identified expressions of action and selected nouns and key terms that identified the action's domain. End of quote. They then use Barnhoorn's multi-level professionalism framework to characterize behaviors as either outer world, so AKA environment, or inner world, i.e. personal features, beliefs, values, those sorts of things. In their reflexivity statement, the authors note that they don't know the physicians who told their stories, and they note that they have experience in reflection, and 2 of the authors themselves are general practitioners. So that's a summary of the methods. I'm interested in your thoughts. Let's go, Linda, Jason, John.
So I read the first line of their methods section, which says it's an analysis of published reflection reports from the book, and then goes to describe the book as you did. But even with that first line, my note to myself was, this is a new method. It's a document review, but let's think about this document. It's, there are multiple sources of bias within this that really make me very concerned about the data. Famous doctors, publicly known, would they actually talk about their deepest, darkest error? All sorts of things like that. It also really surprises me. I'm wondering if this book had to go through ethics review, whether it even would have got through ethics review, the publication of the book, because they're identifying people who've made, from the sounds of it, major errors. So I have major concerns with the data before we even get to the analysis.
I really like this. I agree that there are limitations. I mean, obviously they can't, it's not from a primary interview, so they can't clarify comments and they can't go deeper on areas where they would like to. So there are some limitations to the method. I'm wondering if you'd call this it's almost like it's an analysis of an existing text. I was curious when they did the reflexivity statement, they didn't talk about their experience with error, which seems entirely relevant to this. But nevertheless, while this is an unusual, I've never encountered this kind of a paper before. I actually thought it was a good topic. It was an interesting take. It has lots of limitations, but I was curious. I actually thought this had value.
Thanks, Lara, for pushing us to think of data sources in different ways. I've never seen anything like this before. It made me think about what are the ethical considerations for this, but I guess this is public domain. And so presumably this is data that can be used in a secondary analysis, but I don't see how it transfers. The data is more than 15 years old. So I think the experience of the health system is dramatically different post-COVID. I think the pressures on failing health systems are dramatically different in the 15 years. I just look at my own practice and it's a very different experience. I think the quality improvement, quality assurance process that has determined how we should approach error is more prominent, but it's less punitive. It's still punitive, but it's less punitive than what it used to be. And I think the best example is a change in how M&Ms are conducted. But the last part is I don't believe these people to represent me. They'd say we did a purpose of sampling of people who are public figures who told stories that they knew were going to get published. And I got to imagine this is entirely performative. I'm not going to tell you a secret thing that I'm really ashamed for, because every time I make a mistake, I have a motive or an effective response, and I have lots of mistakes and I feel awful. And I'm not going to tell you that awful story because it's not going to make me, a public figure, look good. And so I don't know about the veracity of this data.
These guys are Dutch. They're so brave in interpersonal conversations. You got to embed yourself in that Dutch culture, John. It's all good. So
go ahead. Okay, this is a moment when one of my two reasons for picking this paper, and I'm going to pick up on the nature of the data in a minute. That's my second reason for picking this. But in this moment in the methods, what I really want to do is highlight again, for our faithful listeners, those of you who've been listening for a long time know that I give a bonus mark to researchers who define their paradigmatic orientation in their research. And I do that for a reason, and this manuscript illustrates that reason, because the paradigm from within which you are conducting your research shapes how rigor is assessed and defined. And rigor from a post-positivist orientation is not the same as it is in something like constructivism or postmodernism. And the point is, the real lesson I would love to have our listeners walk away from this podcast remembering is that if you don't tell people how to evaluate and adjudicate your research, you're leaving your reader to make a decision for you. And they might decide based on a whole bunch of reasons and not necessarily align with what you're trying to do. So let me give you an example from this paper of why this is so important. In the manuscript, the authors say they use constant comparison approach to develop codes and themes. Well, unfortunately, we have a problem now because the term constant comparison was originally developed from grounded theory, and the original tradition of grounded theory, and that is a post-positivist orientation. And this is, you use constant comparison to push your thinking about the patterns and interpretations you're making, the things that you're seeing in the data. And to do that, you create from a set of data, you collect some data, and you create preliminary analytical premises or conjectures. You say, okay, this is what I see. So now I'm going to go get more data that's more focused to try to push on that analytical premise or that conjecture. So now I need to go get more data. Therefore, in that tradition, you can't really do constant comparison with a finished data set because you need to be in the midst of data collection to do that focused selection, that theoretical sampling to push on your evolving understanding. There's a great paper by Lorelei Lingard entitled When I Say Grounded Theory, and we'll put a link of that in the abstract so you can see it. And she does a really nice way of explaining that. And it doesn't mean that you can't do constant comparison with an existing data set, but if you don't tell me your orientation, then I have no way of knowing if you are using that traditional approach to to constant comparison, or if you're taking a more modern orientation. And so without that explanation, you're leaving the reader to make a decision for you. And since grounded theory is very common in medical education, it's highly appropriate for them to say, oh, that's not what grounded theory is. So maybe these authors don't know what they're talking about. So this is one of those moments in when I want to put a paperclip here for y'all to say, tell your reader how you want them to read, interpret, and think about your study. Because if you don't tell them, then you're leaving the reader to make their own decisions. And that's never a good idea. So with that, then, let's move on to results. And I'm going to be very short here for a variety of reasons, but let's talk about the main findings that the authors found in the manuscript. The authors identified 3 trigger themes that made physicians aware that they had made a mistake. Okay, 3 triggers: death, complication to an intervention, or nothing. They identified 20 themes of error explanation topics. 17% of those related to the outer world, so the context, and 83% related to the inner world, such as personal features, something about them. They identified 16 lessons learned, of which 29% related to the outer world and 71 concerned the inner world. And in terms of the main conclusions drawn, the authors state 2 of them. 1, that the trigger made the physicians aware that something had gone wrong too late. So timing is a problem. We need to be aware faster of the mistakes we made. And they come to the conclusion for this piece that doctors should be trained to be mindful. Quote, doctors should be trained to be mindful. When a doctor is able to be mindful and is at the same time consciously applying reflection, then she might have a timely moment of reflection. By doing this, she might be creating a change from reflecting on action to reflecting in action. End of quote. Okay. So the second main discussion point they offer, the authors posit, and again, I'll quote here for you, the majority of topics that explained their errors as the doctor's errors, and the majority of lessons they had learned were related to the doctor's inner world. We hypothesize that when doctors learn more about handling their inner world, they might be able to discover the dynamic modulation in themselves. End of quote. They go on to suggest that doctors should pay attention to feelings of discomfort so they can serve as warning bells. I'm really interested in knowing what y'all think of these. Let's go John, Linda, Jason.
I thought this is the paper you're sending for the holiday edition, to be honest, when I first started to read it, because I couldn't imagine a subjectivist orientation where you do a frequency count of the themes and how many times it's reported in your data set. Like, it's like a non sequitur. Now, it's not mixed methods. This is not mixed methods at all. And their visual representation of their data could really use a work. I don't know what to make of it. I'm going to take a lot of vision. This is where I got to be careful, because here's my upfront bias, which is I have a program of research that would run orthogonal to the worldview and to the findings and to the recommendations from this team, which is said in nice words, but if doctors were just smarter and paid more attention and didn't go so fast, they would stop making mistakes. And all the data shows that's not the case. So pushing out the external world, and that's where all the human factors, and that's where all the systems engineering comes in about distractions and labeling, et cetera. Let's push all that to the side and talk about this inner world dynamic, which is somehow if you use your system 2 analytical reasoning, you will be superior. And the pithy little quote I always like to use is Gurpreet Dhaliwal, who is out at UCSF, says, if you don't know what myasthenia gravis is, there's no way in hell that you're ever going to think about myasthenia gravis from first principles. And that's just a version of be thoughtful and be reflective. And we've done a whole bunch of studies that says, if you ask a doctor to go slow, they will go slow, but they will not get smarter. Yeah. Because knowledge is king. And then all this idea about reflection, helping you accommodate for your own lack of knowledge about information or whatnot, that's a false premise. It speaks to people who don't know how the cognitive psychology literature works. Faye, I'll get off my soapbox because I'm getting fired up.
So, I agree with you, John, on that. And I can sometimes see myself switching from system 1 to system 2 if I come up with something that's puzzling. I guess that would be considered reflection in action, but because I know a little bit about clinical reasoning. But I still doubt we can actually treat. Let me start that again. But I still doubt we can really teach mindfulness. Some people are not reflective or mindful, whatever. I do, however, they made another comment in the results, which I liked. Discomfort serves as a warning bell for clinicians to monitor a situation with greater attention and proceed more intentionally. To me, what that means is basically listen to your gut. And I think that's something that we can say to people. If something doesn't feel right, think about it.
So as a clinician, both of those comments entirely resonate with me. Telling someone to think nicer or something is just has no value. But listening to your gut where something doesn't add up, or one of my residents the other day said my spidey sense is tingling on this case, and they were right. Like this is out of place, or I still think that plays to John's comment about heuristics. I think we recognize when something's not quite right, or this scenario is tricky. It's kind of like recognizing when there's going to be a difficult airway before an intubation. It's recognizing an angry family, or recognizing a third ED visit for the same complaint. That's a feature in the case. And I think all of us, over time, experienced clinicians recognize pitfalls and features. But that's different than what they're saying. They're saying if we would just only pay attention to our emotions or something, which I didn't buy. It doesn't resonate with me as a clinician. Also, same as John, so many numbers and a strange qualitative paper.
Yeah, so this is a post-positivist paper. This is not a constructivist paper. There's nothing about this in my mind that would suggest that they were looking at this in any kind of constructivist orientation. They used words as data, so it was qualitative, but then they counted. They found ways of rank and stack, rank ordering, slice and dice. John, why are you so
Listener,
funny?
if you could just see the look on Lara's face as she talks about this, it's awesome.
But this brings me to my second paper. Go ahead, Linda. You're on mute, hon.
Oh, I know I am. I was going to say, okay. It's a look of total disgust.
Well, it's frustration, because this is my second point with this paper. And this is going to take us back to the data itself. When you are using, okay, hold on. Just give me a minute, because I really am pissed off. Hold on. I'm just going to bring myself back in. So this brings me to my second point about this paper, and it has a lot to do with the data set you use, the foundation of your argument and of the reasoning and the inferences you can develop. So this data is really unique. It is a 3-page description in a book compiled not by a researcher, but an author. And the participants are named, their picture, their professional affiliation is part of the very beginning of these conversations. Only a portion of the interview is provided in the book, and only some core aspects of the error are shared. So I call this paper my best mistake because I think that's what these stories are. They are the stories that individuals feel safe sharing publicly in a very identifiable way. And if these were in North America, they're sharing them in a way that won't get them sued, right? I don't know what the system is in the Netherlands. I'm going to assume that won't happen, but I still think there's a sense of being very careful about how you phrase things. I would, for myself, for instance, if I'm going to tell a story about a medical error, are you going to point fingers at other people who aren't there to defend themselves? Maybe not. Did they pick stories of error that they felt safe sharing? Probably. Did those stories put them in the best light they possibly could? Probably. Did the doctors have several stories to choose from, and did they pick the ones they felt were the most emotive? Did the author of the book pick the stories they thought would sell a book? So when we use these kinds of publications as data, we have to be really careful of the inferences we can draw based on those stories. We have to be careful of the conclusions we draw. If I focus just on the second point in the discussion, that if doctors could be more skilled about handling their inner worlds, they might be capable of committing fewer errors. I really worry about that hypothesis. I worry that these data are really unusual. And so the conclusions or hypotheses that we draw from those, we have to treat those very carefully and be really suspect because these aren't research data. These are book stories. And book stories are different. Research data is different. If it's anonymized, it's different from non-anonymized. So my point here, listeners, is just please be very thoughtful about the kind of data you use in your research. Yes, you can use published books. Yes, you can use pre-existing data, but then we have to treat them for what they are. And if you take chapters from a book, then you have to treat them as chapters from a book and not as interviews. They're not research interviews. They were conducted and curated and edited for publication because they wanted to sell books. And there's a lot of context that shapes what's being called data in this story. So we have to be really careful about how we treat them. So with that then said, I'll get off my soapbox. If John got on one, I seem to have managed to climb on board after he was done. So I'm going to get down and we're going to do this, the voting thing that I know y'all love. So I'm just trying to I got upset. All right, Linda, Jason, John, methods, what do you think?
So I think if you don't start off with good data, it doesn't really matter what the methods are. So for all the reasons mentioned, and I don't want to use a comment that I would normally use if this was not being recorded, that you can't shine, you know what. I'm going to give this a 1.
Jason?
Okay, so I'm not going to be as harsh as Linda. I actually thought there was some value to these methods. They have great limitations. They're not going to change my practice. So I don't know. I'm going to give this a 3.
I'm going to give it a 2. In terms of the methods, they have access to this public source information. It's the implications for the results where you decide whether you can believe about the transfer, or I guess in this case, the generalizability of these findings.
So in my new tradition of picking currency,
this is a terrible tradition. It should be new.
What?
I don't want the new tradition.
No, it's a good idea. No, it's okay. You're just inhale.
I can translate.
Are you going to use new currency, euros, or are you going to use old currency?
No, I'm not going to do new currency. I'm going to go back to guilders because it's cool. So I'm going to give it 16 and a half guilders. I have no idea how much that is. None.
What's the currency exchange on that?
I can translate Sudbury currency, so that's a 3.
That's not Sudbury. That's Dutch. I'm just saying.
It's a Sudbury interpretation of Dutch, so that's still a 3.
And then moving on to educational impact, we are going to I'm going to ask you all what you think. Impact of this work. Let's go, John, Linda, Jason.
Strong 1. If the scale let me go lower, I'd probably go there. I really take issue with how they interpret their findings and how they don't situate their findings in the discussion with the existing literature that would show that it's not about just being smarter. And I really have strong antibodies to the assignment of responsibility for error and placing it at the feet of physicians who are just not secretly doing a good enough job.
Yes.
I really push back against that. No one should read this paper because of that.
So I, too, am going to give it a 1. I might give it a couple of extra guilders or something like that for reminding us that we have to listen to our gut, but there's nothing new there.
So this is a scale about impact, not about methods. And I also agree that there's a lot of problems with this paper, but impact includes, would you use this paper as a stimulus for something? And we can do better studies. So I might pull this out as a conversation piece on this topic. And for that reason, I'm going to give this a 2.
And I am going to finish this round of voting by giving it 6 guilders. So with that then said, friends.
Did you like the paper or not? We're not sure. You chose it, so we assume you like it.
You could hear from my tone throughout the discussion. Anyway, with that then said, friends, thank you so much for listening into another episode of the Papers Podcast. We are always so appreciative that you take the time to listen to us go on ad nauseum about random things related to medical education. If you want to find us, please do a search on the internet. Look for paperspodcast.com. That's us. And if you want to reach us, we would love to hear from you. And you can reach us at the Papers Podcast
at Gmail.
I don't know what the address is.
You know what? You started off as such authority. You had your
I did. I was in there.
And you got right through. And then you're like, I don't know what to do next.
It's because you're
pretty
watching
much like me in medicine every day. So it's okay. I feel you.
It's paperspodcast@gmail.com and and paperspodcast.com, right?
Where does the come in? And for the email or the website?
Goes with Gmail. No, website.
All right. So with that then, friends, I hope you managed to cobble together the right email address to reach us. And if you do, please know we will do our very best to write back to you. And with that, I'll sign off by saying, talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening.
Take care, everybody. You've been listening to the Papers Podcast. We hope we made you just slightly smarter. The podcast is a production of the Unit for Teaching and Learning at the Karolinska Institutet. The executive producer today was my friend Teresa Sörö. The technical producer today was Samuel Lundberg. You can learn more about the Papers Podcast and contact us at www.thepaperspodcast.com. Thank you for listening, everybody, and thank you for all you do. Take care.